During the early morning hours of June 7th, 1992, the tight-knit Midwestern town of Springfield, Missouri would be rocked by a mystery that would haunt the community for decades to come. Three women, 47-year-old Sherrill Levitt, her 19-year-old daughter Suzie Streeter, and Suzie's friend 18-year-old Stacy McCall would vanish without a trace just hours after high school graduation. As we approach the 32-year anniversary of their disappearance, their whereabouts remain unknown. But first, I'm Vanessa and welcome to Unmasked. Please take just a few moments to do a couple important things to help support my channel by subscribing, hitting the thumbs up, the notification bell, setting to all so you'll be notified of all of my upcoming videos. Also, please share this video anywhere you can. Now sit back and get comfy as I tell you all about the mystery of the Springfield 3. Springfield, Missouri is nestled in the southwestern part of Missouri in the heart of the Ozarks. Springfield has a population of 170,000 people, and even back in 1992, the population was 140,000. It's important to remember as we go over this case that this was the early 1990s in the Midwest, a time before cell phones, before GPS, and before cameras were tracking our every move. It was also a time before most of the forensic testing that is used now was available to police. In 1992, Sherrill Levitt was 47 years old and had just moved into a house on a busy street at 1717 East Delmar Street in the heart of Springfield. She had only lived in that house about 2 months. She was a very petite woman at 5 feet tall and 110 pounds with cropped blonde hair and brown eyes. According to her family and friends, Sherrill was a very hard worker. She was a stylist at a local salon called New Attitudes Hair Salon and had a large and loyal clientele. Sherrill was newly divorced from her third husband and had 2 grown kids. Her son Bart Streeter was 27 and her daughter Suzie Streeter was 19. Bart had moved out and was renting his own place, but her daughter Suzie was a senior at Kickapoo High School and still lived with her. Suzie Streeter was known for being fun, street smart, sensitive, and a bit OCD. She was a beautiful girl with blonde, shoulder-length hair and was 5 feet 2 and around 100 pounds. She had an extremely close bond with her mother, Sherrill. Friends later recalled that Suzie always checked in with her mother, and no matter how late she got home, she would go into her mom's room and let her know that she was home safe. Sherrill and Suzie lived together with their Yorkie named Cinnamon. Suzie planned on following in her mother's footsteps after graduation and planned to go to cosmetology school. Suzie had recently tried living with her brother Bart, but the two had gotten into a disagreement over his partying, and Suzie moved back in with Sherrill. Because of Suzie and Bart's falling out, both Suzie and Sherrill were not speaking to Bart in June of '92. 18-year-old Stacy McCall was also beautiful, smart, fun, loved music, and of course the normal teenage things like pizza and hanging out with her friends. She worked part-time modeling wedding gowns for a local bridal store and also worked part-time at Springfield Gymnastics. She was 5'3" and around 120 pounds. She had thick, long, dark blonde hair and brown eyes. Stacy loved fashion and had a closet packed full of clothes. In 1992, she had been accepted to Missouri State University and was excited that her best friend, Janelle Kirby, had been accepted as well. Stacy and Janelle had been making plans to room together and possibly pledge a sorority. Suzie, Stacy, and Janelle had all been friends since 2nd grade. However, they had drifted apart in middle school when Stacy temporarily moved out of state. When Stacy moved back a couple years later, the dynamics of their friend group had changed, as they tend to do at that age. When Stacy moved back to Springfield, it said that she gravitated more towards the mainstream popular crowd, and Suzie hung out with a slightly edgier crowd. However, Suzie and Stacy had just recently started hanging out again during the final months of their senior year of high school. Saturday, June 6, 1992, was graduation day for Kickapoo High School in Springfield. Stacy's mother Janice recalls taking lots of photos and video of Stacy during the ceremony. Stacy was growing impatient and wanted to wrap things up and head off to the graduation parties. Her parents had bought her a graduation cake, and Stacy asked if they could just eat it the next day so she could leave. The girls had plans to attend some graduation parties and then drive down to Branson, Missouri, about an hour south, stay in a hotel, and then go to a water park the next morning. After the ceremony, Suzie told her friends that she wanted to go eat with her mom and then she would meet up with them at Janelle Kirby's house. The girls started the night out at Janelle's and then moved over to a party next door at 8:30 p.m. The girls were having fun, it was late, and they made the fateful last-minute decision to change their plans and head down to Branson early the next morning instead of later that night. At 10:30 p.m., Stacy called her mom and told her about the change of plans and that she would be spending the night at Janelle's house. Stacy's mom, Janice, asked her to call her back in the morning before she left, and Stacy promised that she would. Around 11:15 p.m., Sherrill Levitt was at home on 1717 East Delmar Street and was on the phone with a friend. She told her friend that she was just hanging out at home and refinishing a piece of old furniture. Around that same time, Stacy and Suzie changed locations to another party on Hanover Street. As the night wore on, Suzie was reportedly complaining about having a stomachache. They got back to Janelle's house around 2 a.m., and Janelle's mom had laid out a pallet for the girls to sleep on. Janelle had family visiting from Kansas for graduation, and space was limited, so Suzie decided she wanted to go home to sleep and asked Stacy to go with her. Suzie's mom had just bought her a king-sized waterbed for graduation, and the two decided they would sleep better there and then just come back to Janelle's house in the morning so they could all drive down to Branson. At 2:15 a.m., Janelle's mom heard Suzie saying that she was leaving and asking Stacy to follow her in her car. The drive from Janelle's house in Battlefield to Suzie's house in Springfield was approximately 20 minutes, which would have put them back at Suzie's house at approximately 2:35 or 2:40 a.m. They both parked their cars in the circle drive in front of the house and walked inside. What happened in those next few hours would be the source of nonstop theories and speculation for the next 3 decades. The next morning, when Janelle hadn't heard from Stacy or Suzie, she began calling Suzie's house, but no one answered. Eventually, Janelle and her boyfriend Mike went over to Sherrill and Suzie's house. Stacy's mom, Janice, who was becoming sick with worry, joined Janelle and Mike over at Sherrill's house on Delmar Street. The first thing they noticed was that both Suzie and Stacy's cars were still parked out front in the circle drive. When Janelle and Mike walked up onto the porch, they noticed broken glass all over the ground. Thinking they were doing something nice, Mike grabbed a broom, swept up the glass, and threw it over the fence and onto the property of the dentist office next door. The front door was unlocked, and they let themselves in, calling out for the girls. When they entered the house, the TV was on and was playing static, which is what happened after a VHS tape had finished playing. Sherrill and Suzie's dog Cinnamon came running out, looking anxious and frantic. As they walked through the quiet house, they saw all 3 of the women's purses oddly lined up on the floor. Stacy's mom went through their purses looking for any clues on what could have happened and saw that Sherrill had over $900 of cash and checks inside. The migraine medication that Stacy carried with her was left behind. Both Sherrill and Suzie were chain smokers, and their cigarettes and lighters were also left behind, which everyone agreed they would never do. Although there were some things that did seem odd, Janelle, her boyfriend Mike, and even Janice didn't immediately jump to the conclusion that something horrible or criminal had happened. Unfortunately, they continued to walk through the house and clean up, thinking that Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy would eventually return and explain why they had just left without telling anyone. Again, this was before cell phones and Life 360, and it wasn't that strange to not be able to get in touch with people for long periods of time. As they were cleaning, they saw makeup-covered washcloths in the bathroom, as if the girls had come home and washed their makeup off before bed. The shorts that Stacy had worn earlier that night were neatly folded in Suzie's bedroom, and her jewelry was tucked into the pocket. Suzie had her bikini laid out for the next day for when they were supposed to go to the water park. By all appearances, it looked like the girls had come home and popped a movie in the VCR while they washed their faces and changed for bed. While they were looking through the house, the phone rang and Janelle answered. It was a man saying all kinds of lewd and sexual remarks, and Janelle hung up on him. They then let the next call go to the answering machine, and what I guess we could assume to be the same man left a sexually graphic message on the machine. The reports on this are both frustrating and unclear, but from everything I read, it was stated that the police did hear this voice message, but when playing them back, Janelle accidentally deleted it. So if it did have any connection or future evidentiary value to their disappearances and future investigation, no one would ever know. Police did notice that one of the slats of the blinds in the window that overlooked the front porch was pushed up as if someone had been peeking out of the front window. Since Stacy's shorts, new bra, and purse were the only items of hers left behind, it appeared that Stacy had left the house in just her shirt and underwear. It's been reported by multiple sources that there were some satanic items that were found on some shelves in Suzie's bedroom. However, there are no more details available on this that I could find. The Springfield police filed a very thorough report on the women's disappearance, but no one could understand how all three of the women could have just vanished into thin air without a trace.
Friends and family of 19-year-old Suzie Streeter and 18-year-old Stacy McCall say it's not like them to just leave and not tell anyone where they're going.
She calls and lets me know where she's going to be. She's never missed work. She's a very conscientious young woman.
We're questioning everybody at this time, friends, relatives, anyone that has the information, anyone that may have seen them last, neighbors. We've done neighborhood canvas. We're just checking every lead we can at this time.
The last time anyone saw Suzie Streeter or Stacy McCall was over the weekend at this house in Battlefield. The girls had gathered here with some friends after graduating from Kickapoo High School on Saturday. They left here early Sunday morning.
They said they were going to the other girl's house and they were going to be spending the night there, and they called me in the morning so we could go to Whitewater. And they never called me in the morning, so I called them, and I called and I called and called, and I got no answer. So I went over there, and they weren't there.
This is Suzie Streeter's mom, Sherrill Levitt. She's also missing. Last seen at her daughter's graduation ceremony at Hammond Student Center on Saturday. She lived in this house on East Delmar in Springfield. That's where police found the three missing women's cars. Authorities say there was no sign of a struggle. In fact, the front door was unlocked. The TV was on. Their clothes were still there. Their purses and personal items untouched.
Her jewelry and things were left in her purse. Her makeup is there. An 18-year-old girl that's very proud about the way she looks, wears her makeup and looks nice, and she doesn't go out just wearing a t-shirt and her underpants.
Springfield police have notified law enforcement agencies in the surrounding area and in neighboring states, hoping someone will have an idea of what happened to these three women over the weekend.
After the report was filed, Stacy's parents and Suzie and Stacy's friends posted flyers and started going around in the community asking for help in figuring out what could have possibly happened to the three women. Their disappearance first causing confusion, followed by widespread fear, panic, and speculation. Janice later recalled that she made a pact with her husband that they would try to stay strong in public and dedicate all of their time and energy to trying to find their daughter.
Oh, you lay down and you hear a car drive down the street, so you think, oh, that might be her. So you jump up and look out, or you think, gosh, what's she doing right now? Has she eaten? So when you try to eat something and it gets stuck in your throat, it doesn't go very far.
Janice and Stuart McCall can't sleep or eat. Today was one of waiting by the phone, going to the police station, and this afternoon putting up posters around town, hoping that something will break the vacuum of not knowing.
If you could hang some up for us, and we'd make enough if you'd even be willing to stuff them in the sacks or something, if somebody would do that.
We'll bring them in.
You'll do that for us? You can't sit still when you don't know anything.
Yeah, it's hard to stay optimistic, especially when you don't know what's going on out there.
I'm Mrs. McCall, and this is my daughter.
Okay.
And they're missing, and we'd like to put posters in your windows, on your doors.
Okay.
I feel like I'm in a bad dream. I want to pinch myself and wake myself up, but I'm not asleep. I saw her graduate Saturday night. We were there, and now she's gone. We don't know where.
A few days after their disappearance, a woman saw the flyers and called the police, reporting something that she thought was extremely suspicious. The woman was sitting on her porch around 7:30 a.m. on the morning of June 7th and saw someone she believed to be Suzie Streeter driving a green, older model Dodge van. She said that it looked like the driver was incredibly distressed and had been crying and could hear a man yelling at her from the back seat. The woman also noticed some type of birthmark on her cheek. The woman lived about 2 miles from Sherrill and Suzie's house on Delmar Street. Suzie did in fact have a birthmark on her left cheek, and the tip was considered credible enough that the police painted an old Dodge van green and placed it in front of the police station with a sign asking for people to call with tips. There are some very popular theories about what happened to Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy. One of the most chilling aspects of this case is just how many possible suspects there are. People have pointed the finger at everything from Satanists to serial killers to even alien abduction. After following this case and trying to read and listen to everything available, we'll go through what I believe to be the most credible theories and then which one I personally believe to be true. Suzie had a bad run of luck with a couple of her ex-boyfriends. In 1991, she had dated a guy named Mike Kovacs. The relationship had ended badly, and Suzie ended up filing a restraining order on him, accusing him of assault and slashing her tires. Mike himself admitted that they did get physical in the relationship. Then, in early 1992, Suzie had dated a guy named Dusty Rekla. By many reports, Dusty ran with a wilder crowd, and it was heavily rumored that his group of friends were into satanic rituals. In February of that year, Dusty and some of his friends were criminally charged after breaking into a mausoleum and stealing gold fillings from a corpse. Suzie allegedly broke up with Dusty over this incident and had cooperated with investigators in their investigation and agreed to testify. It was widely reported that Suzie was really stressed out and worried about the situation and being called to testify against them in the trial. When police went to question one of Dusty's friends, there were satanic items visible in his living room, but when they returned at a later date, the items had all been removed. Because of this, many people have speculated that Dusty and his friends came over on the night of June 6th to confront Suzie about the situation, and it might have escalated. I personally do not put any stock in this theory. When police looked into Dusty and his friends, they had alibis, but not completely ironclad ones. They had been at a concert that night. However, police state that they did cooperate, and there was no evidence connecting them to anything having to do with the disappearances. Both Dusty and his friend Michael denied any involvement and even passed polygraphs. The third friend that was involved, Joseph, refused a polygraph, but again, police stated that there was no evidence tying him to anything. Dusty and his friends ended up pleading guilty to the theft at the mausoleum and got community service. The idea of some 18-year-old high school kids being able to pull off kidnapping 3 women without a shred of evidence over such a minor situation just seems highly unlikely to me. It's a huge leap to go from kids dabbling in the occult and stealing some gold fillings to kidnapping and murdering 3 people that they know, especially on graduation night, when most people would see each other out and know each other's plans and whereabouts. After the disappearances, police looked hard at Suzie's brother Bart Streeter as a potential suspect for a period of time. They learned of the falling out between Bart and his family and that Suzie had recently moved out and cut off contact. However, again, there was absolutely no evidence tying Bart to anything.
Police are working extended shifts around the clock trying to find Sherrill Levitt, her daughter Suzie Streeter, and Suzanne's best friend Stacy McCall. The 3 disappeared from this house early Sunday morning. The women had attended Kickapoo graduation ceremonies at Hammond Student Center Saturday night. Suzanne and Stacy had gone to a couple of parties, then returned here to Suzanne's home. Investigators suspect foul play. The woman's cars were in the driveway. Their personal belongings, including their clothes and purses, were in the house. There was no sign of a struggle.
We are still asking for individuals that may have had contact with either the McCall girl, Miss Streeter, or Miss Levitt to make contact with our department so we can narrow down the time frames that we're working with as to physically when was the last time they were seen and known to be safe.
The FBI is treating the disappearance as a possible kidnapping. One FBI agent has been assigned to work with local police. More than 30 Springfield officers have been assigned to the case.
The Springfield Police Department has committed all manpower available to the investigation of the disappearance of these three ladies. The investigations division itself is divided into 2 teams, each team working 12-hour shifts. In addition to that, the department's crisis action team has been assigned to this case, along with additional supplemental support out of the uniform division.
Glenn says police will continue to work around the clock until all leads have been exhausted.
On December 30th, 1978, Army Ranger Robert Craig Cox, who was stationed in Georgia, was visiting family in Orlando, Florida. Late that night, he stumbled into his hotel room bloodied with part of his tongue bitten off. He told his parents that he was jumped by a group of men at a skating rink and that during the fight, he bit off part of his own tongue. They then rushed him to the hospital. As doctors examined him, they noticed some inconsistencies with his story. That same night, 19-year-old Sharon Zellers went missing. Her body was found a few days later, stuffed into a manhole at a sewage dumping company. Her body was only about 400 feet from Robert Cox's hotel room. Robert Cox was a suspect, but they didn't have enough evidence to arrest him at the time. Then, in 1986, he was charged with kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon in California. He ended up pleading guilty, and the police began re-examining the murder of Sharon Zellers in 1978. Robert Cox was convicted of Sharon Zellers' murder in 1988, but because of questionable DNA evidence, he was able to get the conviction overturned. Cox then returned to California to finish out his sentence. In a crazy turn of events, in June of 1992, when Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy went missing, Robert Cox was on parole and living in Springfield, Missouri. He even worked at the same car dealership as Stacy McCall's father. The police interviewed Cox about the 3 women's disappearances, and he denied any involvement. Police were able to confirm that Cox was home with his parents on the evening of June 6th, but at some point they went to bed, and it would be impossible to know if Cox had left the house after everyone went to sleep. His girlfriend at the time gave him an alibi for the next morning, saying that they had gone to church. Despite his alarming past and loose connections to Stacy McCall's father, police had no evidence linking Cox to the disappearances. A few years later, Cox was arrested in Texas for assault, and his girlfriend suddenly recanted her alibi. When a reporter went to interview Cox in Texas, he did make some cryptic statements that he knew that Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy were dead, but that he couldn't say any more. He also claimed that he had been following the case since the very beginning and had watched investigators work at Sherrill and Suzie's house. However, Cox never said anything that led investigators to believe that he had any inside knowledge, and many people believe that he was just embellishing and enjoying the attention from playing cat and mouse games with investigators. It's hard to say either way with the very limited information and evidence available. However, Robert Cox remains the favorite suspect for many people following this case. This brings us to my favorite suspect for this case, Larry Hall. Larry Hall is believed to be one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. Larry was born in Indiana in 1962. He had a twin brother, Gary, and grew up in a very turbulent and abusive household. Larry and his brother were obsessed with the Civil War and frequently traveled all over the Midwest going to Civil War reenactments. During the summer of 1991, Larry and his brother reportedly traveled to Springfield, Missouri to go to a Civil War reenactment. Coincidentally, there was also a Civil War reenactment the following summer on June 6th and 7th of 1992. The reenactment was in Pleasant Hope, Missouri, just 28 miles north of Springfield. I think it's highly possible that Larry and his brother Gary returned to Springfield the following summer, and the dates lining up like that is an incredibly eerie coincidence. Pleasant Hope is kind of in the middle of nowhere, and it would make sense that they would have to drive into downtown Springfield to eat, get gas, and stay at a hotel. When I looked at the route from Pleasant Hope to Springfield, Larry Hall would have likely driven south on Highway H. Highway H turns into Glenstone Avenue. Sherrill Levitt's house is directly off of that road. I think it's very possible that Larry and whoever else he was with spotted Suzie and Stacy driving home from Janelle's house late that night and followed them home. They were both young and attractive and drove red cars, with Suzie's having vanity plates. I don't think that they would be hard to notice. It's definitely possible that after he saw them, he then followed them home and sat outside planning his attack while they got ready for bed. Several of Larry Hall's reported victims completely vanished and their bodies were never found. He was known to be an opportunistic predator who would randomly spot young girls and then kidnap, assault, and murder them. He used knives as his weapon of choice and would tie his victims up before kidnapping them, usually taking them to a secluded area. At least one of his victims vanished from her apartment, and when her family came home, all of her belongings were still there. There were no signs of a struggle, but there was no trace of her. Larry Hall also favored driving older model Dodge vans. He told investigators that he would either bury his victims or put them in bodies of water. Hall was finally arrested in 1994. Investigators also noted that most of his murders occurred in March, June, August, and September. Several of his victims looked similar to Stacy McCall. Hall confessed to numerous murders, but would then later recant his confessions, which made it really difficult for investigators to build any cases against him. He kept his confessions vague and refused to give any specific corroborating details. It's speculated that he could be responsible for the deaths of up to 40 women. He's currently in prison serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Investigators continue to reopen and examine cold cases and look for any potential connections. On December 13, 2013, a disturbing post was made on a forum that recounted a terrifying story from the early morning hours of June 7, 1992. The man claimed that he witnessed the murder of 3 women at an abandoned camp near Lake Springfield. He wrote, "I was 15 at the time that this happened. I was visiting a family member who lived off of Blakely at the time. I snuck out that night with a friend up the street named Chuck, who came up with the idea that we go to Winoka so that he could show me that it was haunted. The chain of events that occurred around 4 in the morning have haunted me ever since. Chuck killed himself because of it before I came back the following summer. We were deep in those woods looking at what looked like an old campground. We were out there walking way the hell out in the woods when a van came out of nowhere. We hid quickly. 3 men got out along with 3 women. These women were scared, shirtless, and begging to these guys. We were out about 50 or 60 yards away. Visibility was shady, and all you could see were the shadows from the headlights of the movement. But I've never forgotten the voices because it sounded like they were right beside us. One was killed pretty quick. From the noises, I think her throat was... You could hear her gasping. The other 2 screamed madly, were beaten, and raped. Silence followed. We laid in those bushes for 4 hours. Whoever the F that was in that van did not leave until nearly daylight. Lucky for us, because if they would have waited longer to leave, daylight would have exposed us and we would have been seen. We couldn't move sooner because of the branches and the sounds of us walking on the leaves. Whoever those women were, I have no clue. The bodies were loaded into the van when they left. I think the 2 were still alive, but just knocked out. The way the man threw the other body in the van with such force, and hearing it slam against the wall, that one had to be dead for sure. I'm 36 now, and that night effed me up for most of my life. I can still hear all of that and visualize what I saw that night. I drank my entire 20s away because of it. It wasn't until I turned 30 that I learned to handle it. It's a powerful post that paints a horrific picture regardless if it's related to this case or not. I did find it interesting that there is an obituary for a Charles, that could be the Chuck he's referencing, that unalived himself in the exact same time frame that the poster references. I'd love to know if anyone ever followed up on this, because in my opinion, it's definitely a tip worth digging deeper into. Kathy Barrett, a freelance journalist in Springfield who has done extensive coverage on this case, received a tip from a psychic that the 3 women are buried under the parking garage of Cox South Hospital in Springfield. When the police wouldn't act on this tip, she hired a ground-penetrating radar technician to come out to the garage. She allegedly did this without telling him why or what exactly he was looking for. He reportedly found 3 anomalies under the ground. I am a bit skeptical of this theory, as the parking garage was constructed about a year after their disappearances, and I don't believe that the killer would take the unnecessary risk of moving 3 bodies to an area under construction where they could be witnessed moving them or be found by the construction crew. However, this is still a very popular belief among many following this case. To this day, the disappearances of Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy haunt the community of Springfield, Missouri. Some of the original bright yellow flyers, although weathered and torn, still remain on local businesses. This case is still technically open, and if you have any information on what happened to Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, or Stacy McCall, please contact the Springfield Police Department.
Each of these sheets represents a citizen call to the police department. These calls came in just today. Each sheet contains information that the caller hoped would help police find Sherrill Levitt and Suzie Streeter and Stacy McCall. Each call has to be checked out. Some take more manpower and more time than others.
We had a phone call overnight from a hang-up caller that indicated that the ladies could be found along Pearson Creek. This morning we took 14 officers and have physically walked the Pearson Creek area from Jones Spring to where Pearson Creek empties into the James River, and found nothing of substance in relations to this case.
Additional photos of the Springfield women were released today. And this recently discovered video of Stacy McCall, modeling for a television commercial. Police hope public interest in the case will help them find the women soon.
I feel the public is cooperating generously.
So whether you've been following this case since the very beginning or you're just hearing about it right now in this video, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe and see you next video.